JB Bickerstaff has been the spark of a ton of debates for the last couple of years for this Cleveland Cavaliers team, where some people think that he's an integral piece of the Cavs being able to turn around the franchise a little bit and, become more of a playoff contender. There are some who feel like JB Bickerstaff is holding this young core back and actively making it hard for this team to get the most out of this young core. So what's the truth? Where do I sit on it? And what do you do with JB Bickerstaff? Well, let's talk about it. But before we do, I want to thank today's sponsor, DraftKings. We've got a good one this weekend, folks. Live from Las Vegas, Leon Edwards will be defending his welterweight title in the octagon against Colby Covington. Have you built your bet slip yet? I partner with DraftKings, and right now, new customers can take advantage of an amazing offer ahead of all fights. All new customers who bet $5 will instantly get $150 in bonus bets. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now, and don't forget to use promo code CavsBurner. That's right. New customers bet just $5 on any wager and get $150 in bonus bets into your account instantly. Stay in on the action and use your $150 in bonus bets on DraftKings same game parlays for a shot at an even bigger payout. Combine multiple bets together from the same fight, including the number of rounds and the method of victory. If you're already signed up for DraftKings, no problem. All customers can get a no sweat same game parlay or same game parlay X. Get a bonus bet back if your bet doesn't hit. Max reward limits apply. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use my promo code CavsBurner. Bet just $5 on any wager and get $150 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code CavsBurner only at DraftKings Sportsbook. So the JB Bickerstaff conversation is interesting because if you don't watch super closely, you don't really understand why there is even that much of a debate, or that there is that much of a debate, right? From the outside looking in, from the 10,000 foot view, you see a coach who has been relatively successful with the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? Has an overall record of 207 and 256, albeit most of that is from 2021, but 44 and 38 in 2021. Last year, he was 50 and 31, the Cavs' first 50-win season without LeBron James since what, the 90s or something like that, something crazy like that, the early 90s too, like short 90s. So for a lot of people, they hear this constant debate that people have over JB Bickerstaff and they're confused by it. And I was one of those people last year where I would hear people who want JB fired and all of this, and it just didn't make sense to me given what the team's record was and given that the Cavs without LeBron James haven't really laid down the biggest foundation for success. But then brings the question, are you getting the most out of the players on the roster? Last year, I thought it was kind of silly to entertain these conversations because it did feel like you were getting the most out of the roster, at least offensively, out of guys like Donovan Mitchell, who looked to have a career year, at least that first half in Cleveland, out of Darius Garland, who looked like he was continuing to make leaps on top of leaps. So, it felt like you were doing the right thing, that things were on the right track. But coaches are kind of like musicians, especially in basketball. Somebody who makes a hot track in 2020 and 2021 might not be who you're trying to listen to in 2023. And that's where the concern is for JB. Are the Cavs still trying to listen to JB? Like, is JB still relevant to these guys on this roster? Is he helping them be better, or have they outgrown JB? What are the arguments against JB and for JB, right? Because it's important to understand why people don't like him and also understand why people might be inclined to want to keep him. One of the main arguments I hear against JB have to do with kind of the nuts and bolts of the coaching job, right? In general, for those of you who aren't super familiar with the JB argument, JB is perceived to be good at some of the culture stuff, some of the player relationship stuff, some player development as well. Like that's where you look at JB and you go, that's his strong suit. And there are things to point to, right? The development of Darius Garland, the defensive development and offensive development of Evan Mobley over the last couple of years. Jared Allen's played as good as basketball as he's ever played. You look like you were getting more out of Donovan Mitchell at a certain point. Craig Porter Jr. this season, Lamar Stevenson last year. Like there are just these guys that pop up that shouldn't be in the NBA, but JB has, in some way found a way to develop these guys. So that's one of the positive arguments for him. And honestly, most of the arguments for JB are going to be about the vibes, right? Like the vibes are good. Everybody likes playing for him. They play hard and he develops guys. The arguments against JB are more nuts and bolts. And I don't know if that's a red flag or not, but it feels like a red flag, to be honest with you. And it's not like these arguments feel unwarranted, is also another point I want to bring up. The ones against him, right? Lack of creativity on offense usually rears his head in the playoffs, and boy, did it. It felt like we couldn't dream up a way to get a bucket, couldn't find a way to get Donovan Mitchell involved in that playoff series against the Knicks. Only thing we could do was have our primary ball handler try to isolate and get a bucket, and that didn't work. And then when we couldn't pass it off to anybody, now I don't give him as much flack for the lack of adjustments with Mitchell Robinson. I don't think he was set up with the roster to make the adjustments that he needed to with Mitchell Robinson. Rotations and lineups are also like one of my, I just hate some of the lineups that JB puts out there. Now, I'm no basketball expert. I'm not even going to pretend like I am a basketball expert. But enough people who I feel like know more than me have complained about his rotations. And honestly, when you watch the Cavs, you're like, yeah, like the rotations don't feel right. Like we be having guys on the court, like the Dean Wade thing in the playoffs was a big deal for me. Like, why did you even think that would be a good idea? It didn't make sense to me then. It still doesn't make sense to me today. I mean, if you watch the Cavs this season, there are multiple times where like, why are we doing that with the lineup? They're interesting, but he has never really gotten a good flow for what lineups work in what situations, when guys need to be in and off the court, who needs to be here, who needs to be not here. Like if it's obvious, JB will get it. But if it requires any kind of next level type tinkering, that's where we're at our worst when it comes to adjusting. Like we tend to get nervous about JB tinkering and making adjustments to the lineup. And that's not a good sign either. Now, I follow a lot of people who felt like are really good. One of the people who I feel like does a really great job of talking about the Cavs is Tony Pesta. And he made the point online, is like, hey, I think JB's a good coach, a okay enough coach. I don't know if he's a great coach. And I think this is a more existential question for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Because I think that's true. JB is cool. Like you can win 50 games with him. You can do some stuff with him that would be cool. The question you have to ask yourself is this core better than that? And I don't have a great answer for that. Like, is this a 50-win core? Sometimes guys get fired because people feel like they're not getting enough out of their core. And we find out, no, they did. Like, they got enough out of that core. Biggest point being Mike Budenholzer got fired in Atlanta for not getting more out of that Atlanta core. Then we found out, nah, he got the most out of them. That was about what they could be. Then he got fired from Milwaukee because he didn't get it done. And it's like, it turned out that's probably what you can get out that core, right? They end up having to trade for another player. So that's a real question. Is JB not getting enough out of these guys, or is this just what they are? Not a great answer to that question. Like, I don't know if changing a coach turns Evan Mobley into a more reliable shooter. Like, I doubt it. I don't know if changing the coach makes, like, I don't think the roster is great. The question I want to ask you guys is, what do you think gives the Cavs a chance to be better? Firing JB or trading Donovan Mitchell? It sounds crazy either way, right? Those don't usually sound like things that make you better. While I think JB has his problems, I think if you get rid of JB and you replace him with somebody who's a little bit better at the tinkering, you might get a little bit better of a team, but I think you ultimately end up with the same team, a 50-win team that might get to the second round, but it's going to go through some pains. Because the big problem with the Cavs right now is, one, this roster is a little bit of an awkward fit at this point. Like, they have some awkward fits on this roster. They don't have a wing player. They haven't had a wing player for years. It's a bit of an awkward fit. And two, you don't have one of those guys. And when I say one of those guys, I think people who watch the NBA a ton know what I mean. It's just not something we like to admit a lot, right? We all want to pretend like we got one of those guys. We want to pretend like Donovan Mitchell is one of those guys. He can be a guy every once in a while, but he's not one of those guys. For those of you who don't know what I mean, when I say one of those guys, I'm talking about one of the best 5-6 players in the NBA. Usually what you need to win a championship, right? Like, if we're talking about getting to a championship, usually what you need. Hey, did the Warriors and Steph Curry become a dynasty because they fired Mark Jackson, or because Steph Curry was on the roster? Now, you can make the argument Steph Curry was on that roster before and they didn't go to the finals, but Steph Curry was also very young when Mark Jackson was on that team, and Mark Jackson was responsible for developing them. I don't think Steph Curry doesn't become good if Steve Kerr doesn't get there. I think he still probably becomes very good. Now, do you end up being able to recruit KD and get that style of play? And do you get something like, the thing with the Warriors and firing Mark Jackson isn't that you get more out of Steph or that you get more out of Clay. Those guys were going to be who they were. It wasn't rocket science to figure it out with those guys. The thing you get with Steve Kerr is he figures out something to do with Draymond. We don't have a Steph on the roster. We might have a Draymond. We might have Clay. We might have every piece you need, but I don't think we have a Steph. I don't think we have one of those guys. I don't believe one of those guys to be Donovan Mitchell. I think Darius Garland is a really, really good player. Reminds me of Chris Paul. Not one of those guys, though. Evan Mobley, at this point, the offense is getting better, but at this point, I think we all know he's not going to be one of those guys. He will be one of the guys, but not one of those guys, right? He'll be a really, really good player, all NBA type level player, defensive player of the year, and he's going to be a pretty solid scorer as well in the NBA. But one of those guys, like Giannis, nah, I don't know about that. I think it's pretty fair to make that assumption, right? Maybe the highest he gets is like an Anthony Davis. And even Anthony Davis, we're finding out, not really one of those guys, consistently at least. So again, I ask the question, like, what's holding the Cavs back? Or are they actually getting held back? Do you think that getting rid of JB is going to fix so many problems that it will elevate this core above what they are? Or do you think it's very possible they could just fire JB, end up in the same exact spot? Like, is JV holding this core back, or is there nothing to be held back right now? I'm not sure. I see nothing that indicates that. This isn't like when David Blatt had LeBron James and Kyrie Irving and couldn't figure out lineups. Like, it was obvious we had enough, and he was the problem. This is different. There's no LeBron or Kyrie on this roster. Well, maybe Donovan Mitchell's as good as Kyle. Nah, I don't know. That's debatable. That's a debate that I'm not going to have today. But that's the question with firing JB. I see the reasons for doing it. He's not good at the technical stuff. The lineups, the rotations, the creativity on offense. He not that guy. And right now, all the vibe stuff seems a little off. This team don't seem to like each other as much as they have in past years. So maybe even he's slipping on that. And if that's the case, he's just going to be gone. But the real question is hey, does JB going away solve your problems? What problems does it solve? And are we overrating how much being better there matters? Not saying he's the greatest coach in the world. Just don't know if JB Bickerstaff having a better coach than him is the difference between 50 wins and 60 wins. I feel like he might be the difference between 50 wins and 53. You feel what I'm saying? But that's it for this video. Y'all have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.